This is a virtual lecture on the endocrine system. I will go ahead and do the entire lecture in this one video. So the endocrine system, like the nervous system, is an integrating system. It helps to integrate all the different organ systems together, allowing us to maintain homeostasis. And the endocrine system is regulated by homeostasis, negative feedback mechanisms. So I'd like you to know the roles of the, in this case, the endocrine system. We'll get to nervous system at another time. I'd like you to know the different types of intracellular communication. The properties, given the properties of a hormone, you should be able to tell me where the receptor is located. You should be able to tell me how one hormone can have multiple effects. You should know the difference between tropic and non-tropic hormones, and explain the role of hormones and glucose levels, and also the functions of several other hormones that you have been introduced to in class. So the integrating systems are the nervous system and the endocrine system. These basically are communication pathways between organ systems, allowing the digestive system and the muscle, your muscles and your nervous system, etc., all to be integrated into each other. And coordination, this basically allows for coordination of all functions, allowing you to be a multicellular, multi-organ system organism rather than a bunch of isolated connected tissues. And this also then allows us to maintain internal conditions or homeostasis, which would all be impossible if your different organ systems did not communicate with one another. All right, so I'm jumping over a few things here. Don't mind that. Those are things I did last semester that I'm not going to include on this online lecture. So there are different kinds of signaling. This chapter primarily focuses on endocrine signaling, where hormones are released, chemical signals are released by cells, perhaps in glands, that then go into the blood vessels, so into the cardiovascular system, where they are then dispersed throughout the body. Those signals then dock to receptors on or in cells, leading to a response. Meanwhile, paracrine signaling is a very similar type of signal, except this occurs when signals only interact with cells surrounding the cell that sent the signal, paracrine signaling. This might be, an example of this could be like inflammation response or something like that, in an area where an infection is taking place. Autocrine signaling is when a cell secretes a signal, but that signal doesn't do anything in the cell. It has to dock to a receptor, so that signal is released and then docks to a receptor within the same cell that sent the signal. Autocrine signaling. There's also synaptic signaling, which we'll get to when we talk about the nervous system. But down here, neuroendocrine signaling is when you have kind of a combination of the nervous system and endocrine system. So in this case, electrical impulses sent by the nerves then reach the end of this nerve cell, this neuron, and when the signals reach the end of the neuron, it causes chemicals to be released, which then, in this case, go into the blood vessels and act as a hormone. So this is a combination of the nervous system and the endocrine system, an integration of those two systems, essentially. So what happens when one of these signals meets a cell? Well, those signals, which, in the previous slides were little circles, here we have this signal. It docks to a receptor. That receptor might be on the cell membrane or in the cell itself, depending on the characteristics of the signal. That molecule, that signaling molecule, does not come into the cell, but its message does get transmitted in. In this case, the receptor changes shape. It's probably made of protein. It changes shape in response to the signaling molecule. And then that causes several other molecules along this transduction pathway to be modified or turned on. Usually that happens thanks to phosphorylation, the passing on of phosphate groups. So one molecule activates another, which activates another, leading eventually to whatever the cellular response is. So the three steps of cell signaling are reception, transduction, where the signal is sent and perhaps even amplified, and response. You can see more about this in the chapter in your book on cell membranes. So hormones fall into three major classes. Polypeptides and amines are made up of amino acids. Polypeptides are made up of a bunch of amino acids. So basically like a hormone that's composed of protein in that case. And amines are simply single amino acids that are sent as signals. Then steroid hormones are derived from, steroids, from lipids. So the polypeptides and amines are typically water soluble, so their receptors are outside the cell on the surface of the cell membrane, whereas steroid hormones typically dissolve in lipid bilayers, so their hormones or their hormone receptors are found inside the cell, inside the cytosol. So this image shows you that. Here are water-soluble hormones being transported by the blood, leaving into the interstitial fluid here, docking to a receptor. You can see it's glowing, which means it's been activated. It's probably been phosphorylated, which causes a transduction pathway and eventually a response. In the case of hormones that are lipid-based, they enter into the bloodstream, usually with the help of proteins that help them to interact with the water of your blood. They go into cells through the cell membrane, and in this case, even into the nucleus, where it docks to its receptor, leading to a cellular response. All right. This is a more complex example of cell signaling, which you can learn more about if you take physiology. So I'm going to skip that slide for now. Here's another example of, let me just go back though and show you. Here's an example of epinephrine binding to a protein receptor that is outside the cell membrane. So this hormone must be water soluble. Whereas a lipid-based protein will cross the membrane and dock to a receptor inside the cell. So it's very important to have your cell receptors in the right place. If you have hormones that can cross a membrane, you better have your receptor inside the cell. So there are a lot of different glands in the body that are involved in this system, and we may have seen some of these in lecture itself, but the pineal gland, for example, secretes melatonin. The hypothalamus is a major kind of organizing center for homeostasis of the human body, and it's connected to the pituitary gland. Meanwhile, we have adrenal glands on top of the kidneys. We have the pancreas. We have the gonads, so testes or ovaries. The thyroid located here. All of these have different functions, secrete different hormones. And those hormones have various effects and are affected by feedback loops, negative feedback primarily. So here's an example of what we would call a simple endocrine pathway. We have an endocrine cell here which secretes a hormone. In this case, it's cells within the small intestine. So they pick up a stimulus. That stimulus in this case is low pH, so acidic conditions in the small intestine. That happens when digested food has mixed with stomach acid and is now located in the intestine. So the intestine has to neutralize that. So a hormone is released, secretin, which goes throughout the body, but it primarily docks to pancreatic cells, causing the pancreas to release bicarbonate, which then is a negative feedback in that the bicarbonate is going to raise the pH in the duodenum, neutralizing that acid, and that will in turn cause this hormone to stop being secreted. So this is called a simple pathway because hormones are released, leading to a response, and then that's where the negative feedback comes in. Now, before I jump ahead, let's zoom in on the brain here. Here's the brain. Here's the hypothalamus down here. Here's the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland has two lobes. The anterior pituitary, which is regulated by the hypothalamus, but it generates some of its own hormones, and the posterior pituitary, which is also regulated by the hypothalamus, but for the most part stores hormones made by the hypothalamus for release into the bloodstream. So when you see the pituitary gland, and in your anterior, that's the side of the pituitary gland facing your eyes, basically, and posterior, that's to the back of the pituitary gland. here's an example of kind of a complex reaction where we have stress in the body, which causes the nervous system to kick in, sending signals to the adrenal glands. The adrenal gland has two parts, the medulla, which is inside, and the cortex, which is outside. And in this case, the medulla is stimulated, causing the release of hormones like epinephrine. Meanwhile, in the anterior pituitary here, we might release a hormone which circulates throughout the body, which makes its way to the adrenal cortex, causing hormones to be released. Now, this is an example of what we can call tropic hormones. I'm going to try to write with a pen here, or the mouse. Tropic. I'm just going to write the word tropic and then the letter H for hormone. Tropic hormone. A tropic hormone, basically like this, is a hormone that causes other hormones to be released from somewhere else in the body. So we didn't see that in the simple or non-tropic hormone example before, but a tropic hormone basically is like a hormone cascade. One hormone causes the release of other hormones. So the other kind of endocrine pathway is a neuroendocrine pathway, which integrates the nervous system and the endocrine system. We kind of saw that in this previous slide with the release of adrenaline as well. The nervous system is involved there too. But here's a simplified example. Here we have hormones that are produced in the hypothalamus, and they're stored in the posterior pituitary. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. And they're released into the bloodstream, but they're released into the bloodstream, and they dock to target cells down here, which is in the breast tissue, leading to milk release. Okay, but here's where it becomes interesting. This whole process begins when a baby is suckling at the breast, which creates a nervous system signal from the breast up to the brain, to the hypothalamus, which causes it to release this hormone to begin with. And what happens is the more that baby suckles, the more of the hormone is released, the more milk is produced. So this is an example of a simple neuroendocrine pathway, meaning there's a nervous system response, and it's a positive feedback mechanism, which we don't see very much in biology. So the more the baby suckles, the more milk will be released. We don't see that typically let me try to be clear here. The positive feedback mechanisms like this are not typically involved in homeostasis, but they are involved in things like milk release or birth or blood clotting. So I should mention, in this case, the hormone that is released is oxytocin, which not only releases milk, but helps to build bonds between individuals as well. Now, let's go back to this hormone here that was released by the adrenal gland here. After the nervous system hit the adrenal medulla here, we released hormones into the blood. In this example, that is epinephrine. And epinephrine is basically adrenaline. That's one of the terms we use for it. And it is a very important signal because it causes lots of different things to happen. For example, in the liver cell, it causes glucose to be released. So glycogen is broken down into glucose. In smooth muscle in certain parts of the body, it leads to vasodilation, increasing the blood supply to certain muscles in the body. In other parts of the body, like the intestines, it causes vasoconstriction, the exact opposite effect, which reduces blood flow to the digestive system. So you're going to increase blood flow to like skeletal muscle, which allows you to run and fight. It's going to reduce blood flow to muscle in the digestive system because wasting energy on digestion while you're running from a bear is not important. Meanwhile, it's also releasing sugar into the blood to give you energy to fight or flight. So epinephrine in this case has lots of different effects. We have this interesting response here, many effects from one signal. this kind of cascade effect. So here's an example of how this might happen. Here's epinephrine in all three examples binding to a target cell, causing, in this case, glycogen to be broken down into glucose, and that increases blood glucose levels. And in this example, we have, notice the same receptor in the cell membrane, but in this case, there are different transduction pathways inside the cell leading to a different response. So in this cell, blood vessels dilate instead of releasing extra sugar. So a different response due to, as they say here, different intracellular proteins. So we have a different response because of different transduction pathways. Meanwhile, in this cell over here, we have a cell contracting. So this might be like in the digestive system. And in this example, we have a different receptor in the cell membrane for epinephrine. So we have the same signal in this case, but different internal proteins leading to different responses. But over here, between these two types of muscle, we have different receptors causing different cellular responses. And that allows one signal, adrenaline, to have multiple effects throughout the body. And just to give you an example of this, what I mean by different intracellular proteins. So here's the signal. It causes this molecule to be activated, then this one, then a response. Whereas another cell might have the same receptor, but it might have a different set of relay molecules or transduction pathway molecules leading to different responses. So it all depends on what molecules are between this receptor and the response, okay? And of course, you can have one signal causing lots of responses in a cell and an amplified response in a cell when one molecule activates another, which activates two more, which activates three more, etc., leading to lots of responses. This is the kind of stuff you'll study if you take animal physiology or plant physiology. But getting back to that example then. All right, so back to this example. We have a neuroendocrine signal here from the hypothalamus through the nervous system to the adrenal gland, causing a release of adrenaline, which is going to have multiple effects throughout the body. It's going to cause lots of things to happen because different cells have receptors for adrenaline. Maybe they have different receptors or different transduction pathways, but lots of things will happen. Increased breathing, increased metabolic rate, increased blood pressure, etc. That's that fight or flight response. Meanwhile, the anterior pituitary is releasing hormones during this stress response, which go into the bloodstream and circulate around, and in this case, they go to the adrenal cortex. So this ACTH, that is adrenal cortex, an adrenal cortex stimulating hormone, essentially. And what it's going to do is it's a tropic hormone. So once again, tropic hormones are hormones that target other glands, essentially, other parts of the endocrine system, so that it stimulates the release of different things in that adrenal cortex. In this case, it's going to cause the adrenal cortex to release mineralocorticoids, which is going to increase sodium ion retention. So when you hold on to sodium ions, water follows. Therefore, you hold more water, you're going to increase your blood volume, thereby increasing blood pressure. You're also going to produce glucocorticoids or cortisol, the same stuff in hydrocortisone cream. That's going to help break down fuel into glucose, and it's going to actually repress the immune system a bit, kind of putting it on hold while you are in this stressful situation. Of course, chronic stress could be a problem, leading to repression of the immune system when you don't want it to be repressed. But hydrocortisone cream is used to, reduce inflammation and things for that very reason. It's that same basic chemical that is released from your adrenal cortex. Now, I also want to mention before we go that plants also produce hormones, and they have reception, transduction, and response just like animal cells. And plant cells tend to transport their chemicals in the phloem That's the vascular tissue. Or it could be from one cell to a neighboring cell, kind of like we saw in those examples in the animal chapter. I'm going to skip a couple of slides here. One very important hormone in plants that I want to mention is auxin. Auxin actually triggers growth in plants. So in this example, auxin is produced at the tips of the stems, and it will actually accumulate on the sides of the stem that are dark. So notice the sun is on the right over here, and so the sun is shining on this side of the plant. Auxin goes to the side that is dark and then causes that side to grow. So auxin is a growth hormone in plants. It causes growth. And what happens is, because it's asymmetrical growth, it's growth on the side that's in the shade, it causes the stem to grow towards the sun. It grows towards the light. This is why plants in a window will grow towards the window, towards the light, which is pretty interesting. Another interesting hormone that I wanted to mention in plants is ethylene. Unlike most animal hormones, ethylene is a gas. For example, if you put, as a control, a holly plant in a jar, there it is after a couple days, and in a different jar you put the same thing, only you include an apple, you'll see that the leaves fell off. This is a gas that causes abscission. This causes leaves to fall off in the fall. That's one of the things it does. It also causes fruit to ripen. This is why you can put unripe fruit next to ripe fruit in your kitchen or in a paper bag, and the ripe fruit will cause your unripe fruit to ripen up, because that ripened fruit releases a gas, a hormone gas that goes into the air and then causes neighboring fruits to ripen, or occasionally it can cause leaves to fall off. It's the signal used by plants to do that, and it's a pretty basic little molecule here, a little hydrocarbon. So I wanted to point out just very quickly that plants do hormones too, and you should know two of them. Ethylene, which causes fruits to ripen, causes leaves to fall off. That's, I have a lot of different things here, but basically, let me just show you. We talked about stem and root elongation, that's auxin, and I also would like you to be familiar with these two for now, which was caused by ethylene, fruit ripening, and leaf abscission. Leaf abscission is leaves falling off. Okay? So those were the two examples we gave. And this one is auxin. I'm going to write a letter A because it's too hard for me to write with a mouse. And this one was ethylene. Pretty cool stuff. There's other hormones as well, like you can buy at the store rooting hormone, which triggers roots to form. There's lots of different plant hormones out there that if you go into horticulture or you garden, you might make use of in your hobbies of growing food in your garden. All right, so that was a rush through the endocrine system. Make sure you're familiar with the functionality of some of those hormones. If you got a hormone worksheet, make sure to be familiar with those hormones on that worksheet as well.